You're going for what?
Hey, yo, we're going for woke.
Healthcare is a joke, you know what's leaving us broke.
We're not here to brainwash or be choosing a side.
We're just two Asian guys here to open your eyes.
Yeah, welcome back everybody to Going for Woke. My name is Calvin Chen.
My name is Aaron Pion.
Yeah, and we're two Asian guys here to open your eyes. Welcome back
That's
to
right.
Going for Woke. Here we are,
That's right.
episode 1.2. Today, we want to continue talking about single-payer healthcare. And in particular, we're going to get into some story time today because we almost very close came to having single-payer healthcare here in America. But something happened, and it's something that we really want to put the light to. Let's do a quick recap real fast, right? We've talked to you so far about what is single-payer healthcare. In the last episode, we share some benefits about single-payer healthcare. It's a system that is much simpler than what we have currently. It saves a lot of costs administratively and otherwise, and it ends up serving more people and therefore saving more lives. There are also some second order effects as well, right? Like we can expect that in a system where there is universal health care, it's single payer through the government. So your employer doesn't have to foot those costs for healthcare for you and for your family. You can expect that there's more space for your pay to increase. It would definitely increase a lot of the number of healthcare jobs in America. And it could also inspire more entrepreneurship because people feel more able to take on the risk of starting their own enterprise because they take their health insurance with them, whether they keep this current job that they have or not. Right. Now, single payer healthcare, it's not perfect. There's some things that should be fixed about it or could be fixed about it, but despite that, it's still better than what we have now. And I'll give you an example of this, right? Right now, we actually have a little bit outside of Medicare, we actually have on some level a sort of single payer healthcare right now, and that's for people with coronavirus. So there's a story about a man named Floor in Seattle, Washington. He is 70 years old and he just came out of the hospital. He beat coronavirus. Amazing, right? Congratulations, Floor. Well, to congratulate him, the hospital sent him a bill that was 181 pages long, and the price tag was $1.1 million. $1.1 million over 62 days. There are about 3,000, I think, items on the receipt for him. Something ridiculous like that. So you you got to imagine being Floor, right? Getting the bill, you just beat coronavirus, and now, like literally, he said that he felt guilty for surviving because of I guess other people hadn't survived, but also because of the bill that he gets to see from surviving coronavirus, right? Now, fortunately for Floor and for other people that are also having to deal with coronavirus and surviving on the other side, Congress right now has set aside $100 billion to help hospitals and insurance companies to defray the costs of this pandemic. And so for someone like Floor, he might not even have to pay his Medicare Advantage policies out of pocket charges. So it's like, wow, that's so awesome. Good for him, right? But what I just want to come back to center on is even though he beat coronavirus and even though, right, he's not going to have to end up paying some of this because Congress has the money set aside, that in essence is single payer healthcare where government foots the bill for your healthcare costs. He still feels that survivor's guilt because of what it could have costed his family. Now, contrast that with all the Americans that currently go through medical debt, like survivors of cancer, for example. Aaron, I think you mentioned some stats about that before. Could you resurface that for people?
Yeah, so in America, 1 out of 2 cancer patients have to declare bankruptcy within 2 years of their diagnosis. And that's because just cancer treatments also are ridiculously expensive. It can easily go into the $1 million range. So for example, there's some cancer therapies out there that cost like $300,000 to $400,000 just for the therapy and the surgery, and then there's medication that people have to take that costs $20,000 to $30,000 a month just to stay alive.
Yeah.
after cancer. And so you can easily see how it can quickly become $1 million bill. And even if you have insurance, you're still going to go into bankruptcy, because you know how we talked about last time, that $73,000 bill, because people are going through the high deductible plan, you end up shelling out $25,000 out of pocket. Well, think about like $1 million bill, like you would still, you're still going to go bankrupt no matter
Yeah.
what.
I can't
So,
imagine if like my uncle got cancer or something, and
mhm.
and my uncle having to have the conversation with his wife and kids to be like, hey, you think I should go for the treatment, or should I just kind of let myself, you know, leave my fate in the hands of God, for example, because this is too
Yeah,
expensive. In fact, that
yeah,
Seattle man, Floyd, right at one point during his 62-day stay, Aaron, he
yeah.
literally at one point woke up and said to his wife, hey, maybe we should get out of here because this is going to cost too much. Can you
Oh
imagine being a
man.
70-year-old man, right? You're like, you know, you're a
Hmm.
prime target for COVID-19 to take an ugly turn with you, and you're just,
Yeah,
rather than focus on only on getting better, you're also like, maybe I
worrying
should
about
forego some
that.
treatment because of the cost. It's just
Yeah.
not necessary, you know. So the reason why today's so interesting is because, guys, we almost we almost in the 1940s got there, and this is going to be an interesting story to tell. So Aaron,
Yeah.
please take it away.
Yeah, let's go over that. So in the like we mentioned last time, the original intent of Medicare was for it to become Medicare for all, right? And Medicare passed in 1965. So the creators of Medicare were hoping, like, okay, later on down the road, future generations of leaders are going to expand the rights beyond American 65 and older. It'll become Medicare for all. But it just hasn't happened. And and before even 1965, before even that happened, we got super close to passing Medicare for all in the 1940s. So I know, Calvin shared the stats before, but we'll share it again just so we remember. In 1945, 59% of Americans approved of single payer, but by 1950, support for single payer dropped down to 24%. And so what Calvin and I want to talk about today is just, what happened during those 5 years to kind of flip American popular opinion from being pro single payer to anti single payer.
It's a 35% swing. I mean, that is not
Yeah.
immaterial. You
Yeah,
know,
and just to put things into context, that was back in 1945, and after that it's never really fully recovered to that 59% approval rate again, because even when Bernie Sanders was running on it in 2016, 2020, people think, oh, Medicare for all, single payer, that's such a fringe idea, it's so extreme, it's so liberal, it's so left. It's really not. It was very mainstream in the 1940s. And the reason people think it's a fringe idea and think that it's extreme, because that's been implanted in us by design.
mm.
So that's kind of what we want to hash out today.
So
So
what
let's,
happened, Aaron?
dude. Okay, so so let's start in 1945, right? Let's start in right here in California. And California, it's we're a pretty progressive state even today, right? We're kind of a leader, and that was the case back then too, back in 1945. So 1945, California had a Republican governor named Earl Warren, right? And he was super popular. He was actually planning to run for president in the future. And in fact, like, he got picked as the vice presidential nominee in 1948. So that's how popular he was. And even as a Republican, he wanted to pass a single payer for California. And the thought process was, like, if you could pass single payer in California and make it work here, it'll probably spread nationwide, and then we could pick it up on the national side. And yeah, so like I said again, like, this is coming from the Republican Party, which, like, you would expect them not to, but that's how popular single payer was.
Mm.
So he proposed he proposed single payer, and he proposed to pay for it with a 3% increase in our payroll tax. And so that, it roughly makes sense, because right now our healthcare costs about 18% of our GDP. back then when Earl Warren was proposing it, it was only 4% of GDP. So just tacking on a 3% payroll tax on every employee, like that would have been enough to basically fund single payer for California, right? So that was his proposal. But of course, it was, vehemently opposed by the California Medical Association. And, last episode, we talked about like why some doctors and obviously insurance companies and other people, there are people that would be against single payer, right? Obviously for various reasons.
And basically the idea was that it could be more paperwork for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're afraid that they may not get paid as much. It's just
Right.
inconvenient, right? Like if we
It is
were to
inconvenient.
move over, it could be inconvenient, at least kind of in between.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
And so the California Medical Association, they come out, strongly against Governor Earl Warren's single payer plan. And in fact, they went on and they hired the world's very first political consulting firm. And this political consulting firm was called Campaigns Inc.
Campaigns Inc.
Campaigns Inc. So it doesn't sound shady at all. So
It's a niche.
It's a niche, exactly. So let's
talk about Campaigns Inc. really fast, because it's like we're introducing this character of Campaigns Inc. We're gonna see them show up again in a couple of different ways. So let's talk about them real fast.
Yeah, let's talk about Campaigns Inc. So we'll get right back to the single payer story, but it's really important to hash this out. So all of this was based on an article written by Jill Lepore in the New Yorker. It's called The Lie Factory. And oh, by the way, guys, forgot to mention, but all the single payer episodes that we've been talking about, today and the last couple episodes, everything's been written out in a blog post, and so that's in the show notes if you guys want to click on it. So if you're interested in just checking out the links and the numbers and the facts for yourself, please, you're more than welcome to. So yeah, there's an article called The Lie Factory by Jill Lepore, and she basically talks about who is Campaigns Inc. Right? So Campaigns Inc., like we said, they're the world's very first political consulting firm. It was founded by a husband and wife duo named Whitaker and Baxter. And they, throughout the course of their run, they worked on 75 political campaigns. And of those 75, guess how many they won? 70. They won 70 out of 75. 70 out of 75. Yeah.
Wait, hold on. What is that? That's a 93% win rate. That is strong.
93% win rate. Yeah.
That's better than the Golden State Warriors at the when they were like killing.
Yeah. When they set a record for wins, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So these guys were good. I mean, to have won, that many campaigns during their time, and I think the question is like, how were they so good? Like, what were they doing? Like, what was their strategy? What was their mindset and whatnot? So I just want to break down like the 5 rules that they played by, right? And some direct quotes for them. But basically the easiest way to, easiest acronym to kind of remember this is FEARS, right? They played into people's fears. So F stands for fan the flames. E stands for entertain and don't explain. A stands for attack, attack, attack. R stands for repeat, repeat, repeat. And S stands for simplify, avoid subtlety. So,
Okay.
let's just go over them one by one.
Let's get some examples.
Let's get some quotes from
sounds
them,
dirty.
Right?
I'll say that.
Oh yeah, it's about to get dirty. So check this out. F stands for fan the flames. And here's a direct quote from Whitaker and Baxter. They said, "We need more partisanship in this country." Right.
Mm.
So right now you can already kind of tell where this is going. Rule number 2 was entertain and don't explain. So here's a direct quote for them. The average American does not want to be educated. He does not want to improve his mind. He does not even want to work at being a good citizen. But there are two ways, and only two ways, you can interest him in a campaign. Either put on a fight or put on a good show. And if you put on a good show, Mr. and Mrs. America will turn out to see it. So that's the entertain part, right? So here's the don't explain part. Quote, the more you have to explain, the more difficult it is to win support.
Basically, the more you have to explain, you seem like you're on your back foot.
Right, right. So it's better just to, like, simplify, throw out like a super simple slogan, and like not have to explain the complexities, behind policy proposals or candidates stuff. So those were the first two rules. Rule number 3 was A for attack, attack, attack. So here's a quote. The quote is, "You cannot wage a defensive campaign and win." And here's the thing about them is they actually invented the whole concept of opposition research. And so so let's just go over that real quick. The back in, I forgot exactly what year, but there was an author, a socialist author named Upton Sinclair. I'm sure you've heard about him, right, Calvin?
Yeah, he's the guy that he wrote this book about, I think, like meat factories and like the horrible conditions in there. And isn't he credited with, or like he was part of the movement to where we were able to start regulating these meat packing companies so that it'd be like sanitary for their downstream consumers?
Exactly.
That's the one.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, like you said, he wrote The Jungle. He was a socialist. He was an author. He wrote The Jungle, and then The Jungle was about the meat packing factories out in Chicago, I think, and just like the terrible, terrible sanitary conditions that were there. And that book, it caused such an uproar amongst the American public that, like you said, the FDA was created as a result of it, and the Meat Inspection Act was created as a result of it. So, anyways, this guy was an influential author. And so he decides to run for governor of California one of the years, and he decides to run as a Democrat. So his primary goal was to eliminate poverty, and so his campaign, it was called EPIC, which stands for Ending Poverty in California. But anyways, he won the Democratic primary for the governorship with a record number of votes, right? But by this point, like, the Republicans are freaking out and whatnot. They're like, oh my God, what if the socialist guy actually wins? So they go out and they hire Whitaker and Baxter to basically destroy his campaign. And here's what they did. They basically, because he was an author, he wrote a lot of books, but he wrote a lot of like fiction books as well, right? So they scoured all his writings, including things that his fictional character said, and then they would just take the quote out of context on purpose, and they would publish these misquotes on the front page of the LA Times like every single day up until election day. And
give them an example, because there was a crazy quote where it's like, I don't believe in marriage or something, but like it's not even him saying it. They're just like attributing a quote from one of his characters in like a stupid situation. Yeah,
so in one of the books he wrote, that character, he finds out his wife cheated on him. So he divorces her, and he writes a note to the guy who stole his wife, basically, and said, I don't believe in the sanctity of marriage any longer. Right? Which is what a normal heartbroken fictional character would say in that situation, right? But they took that quote, I don't believe in the sanctity of marriage any longer, and then they said, oh, look what Upton Sinclair said. And they published it on the front page of the LA Times as if he said it directly. So, of course, like, people reading the newspaper, they're going to go, oh my God, this guy doesn't believe in the sanctity of marriage any longer. I don't want him as governor. So basically that was the sort of like dirty campaigning they would do.
That's amazing too, because back to the second point, entertain, don't explain. The more you have to explain, the more difficult it is to win support. So by them attacking him in this super BS, right, shady way, he's gonna have to explain himself. Like, he can't just let that slide. But by explaining, now he's on his back foot.
Yeah, Yeah, imagine how weak he looks. Be like, oh well, I didn't really say it. Like it was a character in a fictional book I wrote. But by that point, you already lost the audience. So, and later on, they asked Whitaker and Baxter about this. Like they were like, do you feel like you were unfair to Upton Sinclair? And this was a direct quote from one of them. They said, yeah, we knew those quotes were irrelevant, but our only goal was to defeat him. So it doesn't matter. So I mean, just pointing out that example, I know it was a long-winded example of attack, 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 but this was just like how they operated in general, you know?
Yeah.
And so let's move on to the next rule. The next rule was repeat, repeat, repeat. And the direct quote from that is, we assume we have to get the voters' attention 7 times to make a sale.
I
And
swear I've learned that in like a sales. Like my
yeah,
sales manager would have told me that before or something.
yeah. And it's kind of that principle where if you repeat a lie enough times, it eventually becomes the truth.
Mm.
Mostly because people are just kind of confused, like, okay, maybe this thing is just true, you know?
Yeah.
So they're playing by that principle. So, and then the final rule is simplify and don't be subtle. So here's one quote by them. The quote is, a wall goes up when you try to make Mr. and Mrs. Average American Citizen work or think. So I guess this kind of, goes along the lines of like, don't explain yourself, right? Like just keep it super simple, like don't explain. And then the other rule is don't be subtle. And the quote is, words that lean on the mind are no good. They must dent it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just that's Whitaker and Baxter. That's
Don't be
Campaign Zinc.
subtle, but don't be nuanced either.
Yeah,
And
just
just be
hit them
black and
over the
white,
head.
and just hit them over the head with that black or white
Yeah, yeah. It's that
argument.
black or white thinking where there's no room for complexity. It's like you're good, that person's evil. Like you're either with us or against us, sort of mentality.
Mm. So that's how they operated. How, like, what did they do in particular with Governor Warren?
Yeah, so let's circle back around to that. So now that like I said, Governor Warren was trying to pass single payer. The California Medical Association was very opposed to this. So they went out and hired these guys, Campaign Zinc, Whitaker and Baxter. So here's the juicy backstory behind this, right? Governor Warren, when he was running for governor of California, he originally hired Whitaker and Baxter for his governor campaign. But as he saw how they operated, he didn't like their hardball style. He didn't like their dirty tactics. So he ended up firing them right before election day, right before his election day. And so he won his governor's race anyway, despite that. But here's the here's the bad part of that. So Whitaker and Baxter, because they got fired, they held this really deep grudge against Governor Warren for a very long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when the California Medical Association comes up to them and be like, hey, do you want to help us destroy Governor Warren's proposal? They were just like, yes, it's time for revenge.
That's like the Psycho X with like some unrequited love in there.
Yeah, some twisted stuff. So anyways, this desire for revenge definitely gave them that extra oomph, to like try to take down single payer and just screw over Governor Warren with who knows what they really believed in, right? Whether single payer was even good or not, but they were just trying to take down Governor Warren.
I mean, they're hired guns, and so they came to do what they came to do.
Yeah.
How do they do it? Like, set the context right here.
Yeah, so this was spring of 1945 when Governor Warren proposed it, and important thing to keep in mind was World War II was still going on in the background until September of 1945. So with World War II still going on, there's a lot of anti-German sentiment, common amongst Americans, right?
In America, yeah.
Yeah. So here's one of the big things that Whitaker and Baxter did. They printed millions of these postcards, right? And keep in mind, California population was only like 9 million at the time. So even if they just printed like, 3 million, like 1 out of 3 Californians received this postcard in their mail. And this is what the postcard said. The postcard said, "Dear State Senator, please vote against all pending compulsory health insurance bills. Certainly, we don't want to be forced to go to a state doctor or to pay for such a doctor. That system was born in Germany and is part of what our boys are fighting overseas. Let's not adopt it here." So Californians, millions of Californians, they're receiving this postcard in the mail. They sign it, send it over to Sacramento for their state senator, just letting their voice be heard, letting them know. I mean, it's kind of like a modern day petition, right?
It's a modern day change.org. Like, this is even easier
Yeah,
than like a change.org request that you get on Facebook. You
yeah.
just put it
You
back
can
in the mailbox that it
sign and
just
throw it
came
back
in.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was like one of the big things they did, right? But that wasn't the only thing they did. So they wanted to do everything they could to destroy single payer, right? So they knew that single payer was very popular, right? Like we said, 59% of Americans wanted it. So they had to get super methodical, super like strategic about how to go about and take down single payer. So step one, they wanted to ensure that there was an alternative to Warren's plan, right? So what they did was they went to this California Medical Association, and at that time, California Medical Association, they ran their own insurance company called Blue Shield, but it was still in its infant stages. It had just been formed. So just to like kind of reference back to our last episode, like how I talked about FDR, he passed that wage freeze, and that was like in 1942. That was when companies started offering health insurance as a benefit.
Yep.
So that was like 1942. This is 1945. So this is like right around when the health insurance industry is in its infant stages, right? So Blue Shield was in its infant stage, created by the California Medical Association, but it wasn't like really that commonly used yet. So Whitaker and Baxter, they go to the California Medical Association and they tell them, you need to beef up your Blue Shield operations. You need to make it way bigger, so that more Californians can access it. So this is what led to a significant expansion of Blue Shield. So that was step one, right? Create an alternative. Step two, now that Blue Shield is beefed up, Whitaker and Baxter, they reached out to all their connections in the newspaper industry. So they reached out to all the newspaper editors and they advertised what they called a voluntary health insurance week. So it's kind of like a drive.
It's like a blood drive, but it's like a health insurance drive pretty much.
Exactly. So like they're trying to get Californians to like go out and just sign up in droves for health insurance through Blue Shield or whatever else was available, but Blue Shield was one of the options, right? So they advertised this drive in 400 California newspapers. Right, so it was advertised all over the place. Out of the 58 counties in California, 53 of them had this health insurance drive. So it goes to show you like, okay, like Californians are catching on and listening to the message.
Yeah, I mean they're really going for it. They only left 5 counties untouched.
Yeah.
So they tell the CMA to boost up and get to boost their Blue Shield operations. Step 2, they rally a bunch of Californians to go and sign up for health insurance at the same time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then they reach out to those same newspaper editors, right? And they're just convincing them to take a more anti-single payer stance. So just to paint some numbers, there were like 50 pro single payer newspapers. That dropped down to 20, right? There were about 100 anti-single payer newspapers. That more than quadrupled to 432. So 432 newspapers were now anti-single payer, because of Whitaker and Baxter pushing the newspaper editors towards that. So all of this stuff, it's you know, it's shaping Californians' opinions at that time, right? So let's, like, another thing they did, and you know, keep in mind they hit this from all angles. It's not just, you know, postcards. It's not just newspapers. They directly went to the doctors, California doctors, and they prepared 9,000 doctors with prepared speeches against single payer. And just to be clear, that's 3 out of 4 doctors in California at that time. At that time, there were 12,000 doctors in total, and they got to 9,000 of them and basically said, like, here's a speech I want to download into your brain. Give it to your patients so that your patients become anti-single payer too.
Wow.
And it's just like, yeah, it's particularly nefarious because, you know, a lot of people trust their doctors, you know, like a lot of,
Yeah, there's a halo effect there.
yeah,
I mean,
for
yeah,
sure.
that's why pharmaceutical reps will go visit doctors, try to wine and dine them so that they can say,
Yeah,
hey, use my drug over this drug in this sort of a situation. Um, because doctors have that sort of a credibility,
yeah,
they can almost sell something without really selling something.
yeah. They can just like mildly recommend it, be like, hey, I suggest you take this drug, you know, and that's why
Mhm.
pharmaceutical companies, they spend like twice as much marketing to doctors, like, as they do to actually developing the pharmaceutical drugs, which is another reason our
Whoa,
pharma,
what? What?
yeah,
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
yeah. But which is another reason, you know, our healthcare costs are so expensive. Because last time we talked about, you know, we spend like twice as much on pharmaceuticals as other countries. Part of the reason our pharmaceuticals are so expensive is because they're spending so much money marketing to doctors, you know, as opposed, they're not just like trying to innovate the newest drug that actually improves people's health. And
Hmm.
so, and anyways, that's a tiny bit of a tangent, but um, just going back, like they prepared, you know, all these doctors with this like these anti single payer you know, speeches that they would give to their patients. Um,
Mm.
and then after that, they coined and popularized the term socialized medicine. And the reason, you know, like we talked about before, like socialized medicine, like single payer is not socialized medicine. It's a, you know, socialized insurance system, if you really want to use the word socialized. But yeah, it's, the government is just trying to be the payer of the bill,
Yeah.
you know. But nonetheless, they still use the term socialized medicine. And the reason that's so effective is socialist has been a dirty word in American politics since the early 1900s. Like since before World War One, like the word socialist has always had super like negative connotation, you know, amongst
Mm.
Americans. And you can kind of still see that today. Like every time, like Obamacare, you know, and you know, anything that even the public option, it gets denounced as socialist, right? Um, so, anyways, they cleverly use that word.
It's one of the great American boogeymen. You know,
Yeah,
socialism,
socialism.
communism. And so by using the term socialized medicine, it's kind of like you're already painting it in this negative light. Then you have these doctors that you trust, kind of like helping you to helping to shepherd you along that path. Uh,
Yep.
Blue Shield is ready. We got these drives going in this newspaper that you probably read.
Hmm.
And so it's everything's just kind of making it so easy on the average Californian at that time to just kind of move into or move away from single payer healthcare
Yeah, it's
because
just an, they just came with an avalanche of things, you know, and they just
I mean
like,
it's very genius, dude. Like seriously, like they could be some great uh, lately I've been reading about like organizational change and how to change a culture of an organization, right?
uh huh,
How do you solve complex social issues? Like in Thailand a while ago they had this spike in like AIDS and
uh
stuff, and
huh,
it's kind of like how do you solve for these complex social issues where there's like a couple different triggers, you have to attack it from all sides, and that's exactly what they're doing right here. It's kind of impressive, if not
yeah.
messed up. It's kind of impressive actually what they did.
Yeah, yeah, they just like they left nothing to chance. And so,
Yeah.
That's how they did it. So, I think Jill Lepore, she phrases it the best. She said, Whitaker and Baxter took a piece of legislation most people liked and taught them to hate it. And that's
Hmm.
exactly what happened. Right. So here's the thing is even after all that, like after all those shenanigans, after every single thing that Whitaker and Baxter and Campaigns Inc. did, Governor Warren's single payer plan, it was defeated by one vote. It was defeated by
Hmm.
one vote in the state Senate.
That's how close we came, everybody. Don't
That's
say your
how,
vote does not matter. Wow.
yeah, we were one vote away from having single payer in California in 1945.
Yeah.
And now here we are 75 years later, like just wishing, that happened. Um,
I think when you look at this scenario right here, I mean, it got defeated by one vote. It's a pretty slim margin of victory. I think it speaks to how popular single payer single payer healthcare was
it
in
was,
California.
yeah.
Um, but also at the same time, if it was that popular, right? You said it started with like 59%
Hmm.
support and dropped to like 24%. I think that really also speaks to just the potency of this approach that Whitaker and Baxter took, right? Like if they're the world's first political consultancy and they took this approach, I mean, when I look at it, just from like a coaching perspective, looking at the psychology of what's going on right here, they're really turning politics into junk food
Oh
because
yeah,
they're really not advocating for anyone trying to educate the American public so that they can make good decisions on behalf of our society. What they're actually encouraging people to do, what they're actually doing is they're triggering people. They're sort of like safety mechanisms and that reptilian brain that says danger, danger. I have to like be hyper vigilant and look out for danger right here. And so it's kind of like, why go do this bigger thing that would be great for society when I need to fend off danger and fight socialism somehow? And so
yeah,
in a way they're kind of, I mean, this is the 1940s. I didn't think that it went back this far, right? This style of, but I mean,
yeah,
um, I mean, just they're basically hacking a vulnerability in the human psychology, you know,
yeah.
and yeah, well, I just kind of really taken by because we see this in American politics now, this approach
Hmm.
with like, right, don't be
Exactly.
nuanced, right? Keep it simple, but don't be subtle at all. Just attack, put people on the defensive. Doesn't even have to be right, doesn't even have to be true, and I think it really dumbs down the American public.
Yeah,
It's not that Americans really choose to be dumb, but when your nervous system has been hacked, right? When you're in a state of fear, when you're in a state of hypervigilance, you're not really going to be like, you're not like, oh, let's be open-minded right now. You know what I mean? You're like, get rid of the threat, get
yeah,
rid of the thing that is putting my
yeah,
whole safety at risk right here. And so it's kind of like when you trigger that, then you're not really going to get people who want to be well informed. You're going to get people who are going to respond to threat. And really, I think that's hopefully what good education is for, good personal development and good
hmm,
spiritual development is for, is so that we
hmm,
can discern when um, politicians or companies even are trying to press our buttons and trigger that reptilian brain and kind of take
yeah,
over our own critical thinking faculties. And it's kind of like, man, how many other ways in America have we voted against our own best interests, either like political votes or dollar votes?
yeah,
It's just
yeah,
it's really fascinating. Like this is where like politics meets like black hat marketing tactics in a way.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Man, it's like really disappointing to see that it's still in place today. And just the fact that this happened in 1945, and it's just been with us for 70 years. And the invention of Google hasn't really changed that much. you know, there's still like there's still teams, there's still people like batting for a team, and that's kind of what we want to combat against with this podcast, right? Ideally, we want to try to step out of that,
Mm.
and make that information more available.
Yeah.
So,
Let's tell the
anyways,
other side of this story right here, because I mean, so this happened in California, but we also came close to having single-payer healthcare, just like in America.
yes,
Right? President Harry
yes,
Truman was gonna go for it right here on the nationwide level, and
yeah.
something happened here.
Yeah, so the exact same year, Harry Truman, Democrat President Harry Truman, he was also trying to pass single payer, right? But, and here's a quote that he shared that I really found eye-opening. He said, "The main reason people do not receive healthcare is because they cannot afford to pay for it. This is true not only for the needy, but also true for many self-supporting people." Can you imagine that? It's not just, it's not just people who are unemployed or who are just like not working that can't afford health insurance. He's saying right here, many self-supporting people cannot afford health care. And this is back in
It's
1945.
1945. I gotta say, I that seems quite woke for a president to say. And, like, I mean,
Yeah.
he must not have had all the. I don't imagine that he was a very like, or well, hold on. Even if he came from a lot of privilege, like that, just there's a level of kind of getting out of your shoes and putting yourself into the shoes of the common man to be able to
Yeah.
say this. Like I think that's pretty
Yeah.
cool that a U.S. president named that in
Yeah. And
1945.
yeah. And, speaking of which, like, this is a bit of a tangent, but I know for a fact Harry Truman, he was like one of the brokest ex-presidents. Like after his presidency and he was done at the White House, like he had to move in with his mother-in-law. With his
No,
mother-in-law,
dude.
yeah, because he just didn't have money. And because like I think it was Dwight D. Eisenhower, like the president after, or one of the following presidents felt bad for him. It's like, damn, like Harry Truman, he served our country, but he's broke. So they set up
Getting
like
yelled at by
this.
his mother-in-law now.
Yeah, so they set up this pension fund
Oh.
for ex-presidents. And then so that happened. And then like when Lyndon B. Johnson passed Medicare and he signed it into law, like he signed it right next to Harry S. Truman, and then Harry S. Truman became the first recipient of Medicare. So
Wow.
yeah. So I mean, for what it's worth, I guess he was a man of the people or whatever, if that counts. But
Okay,
either
nice.
way, like I guess you don't have to be, like you think about the Kennedy family or FDR, like they came from wealthy families, but they still vouched for policies that helped all Americans, right? Like working class Americans. So
Hmm.
I don't even know why I wanted to go into that tangent. I just thought it was interesting.
Well, yeah, I said something that led you to something else. That's how this works right here.
Yeah, so let's
All right,
get
let's bring it back.
back on
Let's bring
topic.
it
Let's get back on
back.
topic. So 1945, so Harry S. Truman proposes single payer. But 1946, Republicans took over Congress, so obviously single payer is not going to get anywhere. So 1948 is his re-election year, right? So January of 1948, he comes out the gate swinging, during his re-election year. So he comes out for his State of the Union address, and he urges the passage of single payer. And this is State of the Union. And he, while he was campaigning for re-election in 1948, he promised single payer. He repeatedly promised it. And speaking of him being woke, his other big promise was civil rights legislation. He promised to push forward, like,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, civil rights for African Americans. He had like a 10-point plan for that or something. But yeah, those were like, I think single payer and civil rights were like his two big things that he was like campaigning on, like really, up front. And check this out, he won the popular vote by 4%. So what does that tell you? Like the American public at that time, they were, yeah, pro single payer and pro civil rights, at least to a certain extent, right?
I mean, they were
Um,
pro him, but like he was the noise that he was making was about single payer and civil
right,
rights, and so
right. So they basically endorsed it in
yeah,
a way. By the way, like this is also just like interesting side note. Remember Governor Warren from California who tried to pass single payer?
yeah.
So he was the vice presidential running mate of Harry Truman's Republican opponent in 1948.
So single payer was a pretty big. The ghost of single payer was kind of looming.
Yeah, so it goes to
over
show
that
like
whole
you got
election.
yeah. So you got the president, the top of the Democratic ticket, vouching for single payer, but then you got the vice president of the Republican ticket, like tried to pass single payer in California. And it just goes to show like how widespread the acceptance of single payer was, you know, across the aisle, across all Americans. Anyways, I just felt the need to like hammer that in again because it's frustrating.
All right, so what the hell happened, dude? Like, why couldn't Truman do it? He's the freaking president. You know what I
Oh
mean? Like, he won the
man.
popular vote. What happened?
Yeah. All right, so let's go over that. So you remember in California, the California Medical Association came out and they hired, you know, Whitaker and Baxter to destroy Governor Warren's plan. So a few days after Harry S. Truman won his re-election campaign,
Uh-huh.
the American Medical Association comes out and then they hire Whitaker and Baxter to take down Harry S. Truman's single-payer plan.
Damn, these guys got clout. Like, they're not just like a consultancy that works with like campaigns in California.
No,
Dang.
they were big level because yeah, the American Medical Association wanted someone who had expertise in taking down single
Yeah, that's true.
payer,
Yeah.
and so who do you call up? You call up Whitaker and Baxter because they've already done it. So just to draw a couple parallels, you know, when we were trying to pass single payer in California, World War II was going on in the background. And so there was a lot of anti-German sentiment that Whitaker and Baxter took advantage of. Now in 1948, when Harry Truman's trying to pass it, this was during the McCarthy era. And, you know, McCarthy era, it was like a very strongly like anti-communist, like Red Scare era where like over 12,000 Americans were accused of communism. They lost their jobs. They were thrown in prison. It was a pretty big deal, like this anti-communist sentiment. So, of course, Whitaker and Baxter decides to take advantage of this anti-communist sentiment. And they compared Harry Truman's single-payer plan to the Soviet Union. And check this out, Calvin. They even made up a Lenin quote, right? They straight up like, you know those quotes that you see on Facebook of memes of like quotes that are said by like Abraham Lincoln or something, but he totally didn't say it.
Yeah, Confucius say something.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's completely made up. Okay,
Yeah.
so they did that with Lenin. And this was the made up quote. Quote, socialized medicine is the keystone of a socialized state. And then Lenin.
Basically, this is our gateway drug strategy.
Yeah.
For communism.
Yeah, basically. So that's just like the tip of the iceberg on what they were doing. But here's a really interesting quote. Like it's what you were saying, this is the gateway drug. So here's a direct quote from Whitaker and Baxter. Hitler, Stalin, and the socialist government of Great Britain have all used socialized medicine to take away liberty and lull the people into non-resistance. If the old world contagion of public healthcare spreads into our new world, that will mark the beginning of the end of free institutions in America. After that, it's only a matter of time until the railroads, steel mills, banks, and farms are all nationalized. So it's what you said. They were like, it's a gateway drug.
Yeah, if you let the government make healthcare more efficient, save more money that way, save more lives that way, make it easier for people that just have their health insurance needs be taken care of by the government, we're going to turn into Russia.
Yeah.
That's the idea right there. And here are some shady quotes that we just made up to support that. Is that it, or like was there more?
No, I mean that was the big one. But anyways, like big picture, just zooming back out again. In total, the American Medical Association / Whitaker and Baxter, they spent a total of $53 million in today's dollars to defeat Harry Truman's single-payer plan. So just to give some statistics or, some of the things that happened, they printed over 100 million anti-single payer literature. So like pamphlets and quotes with that fake quote on it and stuff. They printed 100 million of those things. And the US population at that time was 146 million. So two out of
Two-thirds of
every
American.
three, yeah, 2/3 of Americans receive some sort of anti-single payer literature, right? Doctors were mailing anti-single payer brochures along with their medical bills to their patients. It's like,
Wow.
hey, thanks for coming in for your sore throat the other day. By the way, here's a interesting piece of anti-single payer literature you should read during your free time.
Continuing to use that halo effect.
Yes, continue to use that halo effect. And then like here's another thing, like doctors' wives, they would host these anti-single payer parties. And like during these parties, they would just talk about the evils of socialized medicine. Right. So they would just, man, like these
Wow.
guys, they just hit it from all possible
So,
angles.
and you're saying that Whitaker and Baxter coordinated all of that?
Yeah. I mean, they were American Medical Association's like top head honcho organizing
got
all
it.
these efforts. Right. So the American Medical Association obviously funded it. Right. And then they paid Whitaker and Baxter the like the fee that Whitaker and
see.
Baxter would charge. But yeah, they coordinated like this whole
They
attack.
masterminded it pretty much.
They masterminded it.
Okay.
And so let's just go over the results, right? Let's go over how effective they were, because I feel like, yeah, obviously single payer didn't pass, right? But I feel like that's an understatement. So let's go over exactly how effective Whitaker and Baxter were on destroying single payer on a national level. So Calvin, do you remember back in the days before the invention of Facebook and Twitter, there used to be this thing called like writing letters by hand?
It has something to do with like handwriting or something. Like
Yeah,
cursive.
yeah. People would take out paper and they would like write on them and they would mail it in. Okay, so back in the day, like nowadays, opinionated people, they, you post on Facebook, you post on Twitter, you post on Reddit, whatever, right? Back in the day, really opinionated people, they would write letters to Congress, right? So they would mail in these letters. So here's the thing, is like there were lots of opinionated letters in favor of single payer going to Congress before Whitaker and Baxter started destroying it. And in fact, the number of pro-single payer letters outnumbered the anti-single payer letters by a ratio of 4-1.
Okay, so this is like a kind of a barometer of kind of the American social support for single payer as opposed to people who were against single payer. Like
Right.
they were outweighed 4-1.
Right, amongst the opinionated, like vocal Americans. Right.
Yep.
So yeah,
okay.
earlier we said like 59% of like overall Americans, but that's just a poll, right? Because poll, like you're not invested in it, right? You're just like, you get a phone call, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm for a single payer. But yeah, for you to actually carve out the time to write a letter to your, to your congressman or whatnot, like, yeah, so it just shows how passionately people were pro single payer, that it outnumbered the anti-single payer letters 4-1, right? 9 months after Whitaker and Baxter and the American Medical Association started doing all these things, that ratio flipped. The number of people writing letters like anti-single payer outnumbered the pro-single payer letter writers 4-1, right? So now you got the vocal Americans, the passion, it's on the side of the anti-single payer Americans. 9 months. So within a span of 9 months is when it flipped. So it's not even like, it's not even a 5-year span from 1945 to 50. It's a 9-month span from November 1948 to like August 1949. And
yeah, wow.
it just flips. So all that to say,
4-1.
Obviously, 4-1. 4-1.
Yeah.
So all that to say that, like, obviously single payer didn't pass on a national level. And President Harry Truman, like later on, he said this was the deepest disappointment of his presidency, was not being able to pass single payer. So, so that's where we're at. So, after that, like 1940s, we were the closest we got to single payer as a nation. But after that, like the only silver lining that came from that is, like we mentioned, Medicare and Medicaid passed in 1965. And Medicare and Medicaid, they basically used the single payer model. And then 1971, Senator Ted Kennedy, who was JFK's youngest brother, he proposed single payer. He was super popular. He was trying to, he was trying to get some momentum behind that, gather some popular support for that, but that didn't work. And then 1976, President Jimmy Carter, or candidate Jimmy Carter, he endorsed single payer while he was running for president. But once he got elected into the presidency, he backtracked because and he had a lot on his plate at that time, and he just decided single payer wouldn't work. So that just kind of brings us to today. Is like single payer, when we talk about it, it's kind of initially presented as like this fringe, super left-wing idea, but I guess the one thing I want our listeners to take away is like it's not a fringe idea. It's the notion that it's a fringe idea that's been programmed into you by Whitaker and Baxter in the 1940s, and then like it's just never been deprogrammed from the masses. And it's just kind of like, man, this is like, right now there's the whole like we got the Black Lives Matter thing going on in the background, right, with the protests and whatnot. And it was interesting. My pastor, he shared this sermon this morning about systemic racism. And what it is like you put a bunch of monkeys in a cage and you have a banana hanging from the ceiling of that cage, right? But every time a monkey tries to go up and grab that banana, they get hosed down. They get punished, right? So basically the monkey's not able to go up and grab that banana. And so like every time a monkey tries to get it, hose, right? And then they swap out one monkey and they bring in a brand new monkey. The brand new monkey sees the banana, he tries to grab it, but then now you don't even have to hose them down. The other monkeys grab that monkey, bring him back down to the ground. And then one by one, you start swapping out all the old monkeys for the new monkeys. And now you have like 12 brand new monkeys who never got sprayed during their time in the cage. And yet, anytime one of them tries to go grab the banana, the other 11 of them drag them back down to the bottom of the cage.
It just became this learned behavior. It
Yeah.
just became a culture of that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. It's like no questioning, like, where did this belief come from? Where did this assumption come from? Like, should we really be doing this? It's like, oh no, like these are the rules. I'm doing it because everyone else is doing it. And like, so he was using that to illustrate systemic racism and what's wrong with our system. And I see the exact same thing here. Like, oh wait, why do you think single payer is socialist? I don't know, because everyone kept saying it was socialist for 70 plus years.
Yeah, it's just so associated with it that it takes more work to disassociate it and argue against it. But then now you're on your back foot and nobody has the time to really think it through.
No. So yeah, we're all just like, basically we're a bunch of sheeple just like following the past 70 years worth of conventional wisdom. And now we know where that notion originated. It was with Whitaker and Baxter. It was in the 1940s. And we've never really like broken out of it since. So here we are today.
Yeah, here we are, right? Yeah, when I look at this, on one hand, I look at my life. It's like, well, I'm so grateful for my life, right? I still have the opportunities that I have, and I still have the awesome people in my life that I have. And so on one hand, I don't know any different as an American to say, man, like how much better would my life be if we had single payer healthcare? Like I can guess at it. You know what I mean? But I think but when I hear this, like my instinct isn't to say, man, like this system right here, like all these numbers are pretty astoundingly messed up, and it's kind of interesting trying to reconcile that where it's like, well, I still have things in my life to be grateful for, but at the same time, what are the implications of this fear-based politics?
Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah, life as we know it right now, it is what it is on one hand, but on the other hand, right? Like, what has this fear-based politics cost us, as
Mm-hmm.
far as what sort of environment could we be living in now if we
Mm-hmm.
had single payer right now? And again, right, Medicare is not is better than what we currently have right now, but it's still not the perfect system. There are things to evolve about it, but at the same time, if we did single payer 70 years ago, what sort of challenges would we have been able to evolve and smooth over and correct, and what kind of system would we be able to have now 70 years down the line if we
Yeah.
were able to have that pass at that point? I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of predicated on what if we didn't have this fear-based politics,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in the first
Yeah.
place. But it's kind of like, what's interesting about this fear-based politics, where, right, fears-based politics, um, is that I don't know that this has only cost us single payer,
Oh yeah.
because this conversation about socialism and communism and these kind of like great American boogeymen, like, they show up in a lot of other conversations also.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, where else has it cost us, and what else will it cost us if we're continually not able to think about these issues in nuanced ways, and we just kind of like continue to lean on this politics of, not getting into like the real meat of things, not really expecting the average American to really understand or think through the issues too hard right here. I think that could really cost us a lot, and we leave a lot of the decisions, um, to be made by people who have a vested interest in things being a certain way, like
Mm-hmm.
the California Medical Association, like the American Medical Association, right? I don't think individually any of those people are bad people. They have their incentives, but what happens is when they're able to pull their power together and influence the way that Americans think about our options and think about the way that the system should be, like, their interests have, um, the California Medical Association, the American Medical Association, their interests have really trumped the best interests of Americans at large. And I'm not even saying that single payer healthcare is like the thing to do, right? Different countries are doing it
Mm-hmm.
in several different ways right here. So it's not
Yeah.
like single payer is like the thing to do, but at the same time, we got to be able to talk about this stuff. We got to be able to like look at these options on the table, like, beyond the lens of ideology, to just look
Mm-hmm.
at what can really make America as great as we all know it could be.
Yeah. And yeah, it's like you're saying, there's, Germany, Australia, like they're not using the single payer model, but they got to universal health care. But there's just something about it where, like, even Obamacare, when he was trying to pass the public option along with it back in 2012, like that gets denounced as socialism by the Republican national chair. And so there's just this visceral, like, gut reaction that's just been passed down to us, and
Mm.
we've just never unlearned it. But I mean that's why we're we're trying to create this podcast, right? I mean, we
That's why
we
we're
want
talking about
to,
this stuff.
yeah, we want to, like, we want to do what we can to just kind of like, we got to start deprogramming people, like, from the mindset that they've inherited from the 40s.
Yeah.
And basically, like, fine. And because the end goal, like, yeah, it doesn't have to be single payer, but the end goal of politics is to improve as many Americans' lives as quickly as possible, right? And
Yeah, it should be
so
progress for the society as a whole, not like winning for a couple
for a
key
team,
interest groups.
yeah. And so,
Yeah.
like, yeah, at least we, at the very minimum, we should try to have a mature conversation about it without resorting to, like, oh, that's socialism, you know?
Yeah, that's such a cheap
So
trick.
it
But
is. It
yeah,
is.
so everybody, thank you for tuning into this episode. Hopefully, this session today really opened your eyes to some of the darker ways that these political conversations go
Hmm.
and have happened. From here in the next episode, what we want to get into is where can we go from here? What are other countries doing now that we realize, okay, what we have in America is could really be improved if we can look beyond the boogeymen of
Yeah.
socialism and communism. Where could we really go from here? Well, what are other people thinking? We don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. We can take stock of different reference points out there so that we can take a look at for ourselves, okay, what makes sense for us? And I think that if we can understand how other countries are doing it, pluses and minuses and all of that, we just create a more informed you, and maybe you can do what you know is right for you and your family and your country when it comes time to vote on it.
Um,
Yeah. So thank you again, everybody. I'm going to look forward to the next session. Aaron, anything that you want to say before we close out here?
no, thanks for joining us. Hope to
Thank
see you
you
guys
so
next
much,
time.
everybody. Yes, sir.
All right.
Hey, thanks for tuning into this episode. If you like getting woke with us, then subscribe now and give us a 5-star rating. And if at any point you thought, I wish more people heard this, you can spread the word by sharing this podcast with them. We appreciate it. Until then, keep your eyes, your ears, and your hearts open, everybody. We're out for now.